Hi, my name is Laura Loy. I'm a member of Canopy Roads Baptist Church. I'd like to share my story. I was born and raised in a small country called Singapore in Southeast Asia. I was born in a family that was very steep in Taoism. Taoism is a form of pagan worship that very prevalent in the East, and we do practices like burning of joss sticks, burning of paper money to our ancestors because we believe they're still alive even though they're dead, and we eat offered food to idols, and we go to temples and we worship idols. So that's always been a part of me growing up as a child, something that me and my family does. I became a Christian when I was 14 years old. My friend had invited me to a youth service. And before then, I've always known about Christ because when I was young, my mom would, casually bring me to church. And I've always heard of this Jesus. He was to us, he was always referred to as the foreign God. So, I know he loves people and all that kind of thing. But that night, at the age of 14, I met him very personally. He became very real to me. I felt like he was beckoning me to get to know him more. So being 14 and thinking that church was the perfect place to meet boys, I went ahead and I became a Christian. So I went back home and I told my parents, and my parents didn't think much about it because I told them, oh, it's just a place I want to hang out with my friends, and they didn't think much about it. They let me go to church. They started become more fearful of my new faith when they noticed new changes in me. I started giving to the church. I started not following them to the temples. I started refusing to be involved in ritualistic practices like burning of the joss sticks and burning of the paper money. And that's when they realized that I was taking this Christianity very seriously. And I remember even when I was at the age of 14 years old, when I was making all these stands for my faith, I always see God paving the way for me. And every path that he paved for me, he became more and more real to me. And it made me even more determined to get to know him more and to see my parents be safe, because I know that he's not just a God. He's a real person to me. And I remember there was one time I was starting to give to church, and I remembered that my mom, after finding out that I was getting more heavily involved in the youth ministry, she had tried to persecute me. I mean, she had tried to stop me from doing that by calling my youth pastor and threatening to throw him into jail. And I remember that she also stopped giving me allowances to school. She gave me very minimum, so that I don't have enough to give to the church or to I remember there was this youth church that I really wanted to go, youth camp that I really wanted to go, and I didn't have enough money to put a deposit for it. And I asked my mom for money, and she says, well, I'm not giving you money, but if you can find money, you can go. So I was just trusting God that somehow I'll have the money. And I remember at the very last minute, my youth leader came to me and said, Laura, someone out of the blue wants to sponsor you to go to church. And I was just elated. I was like, yeah, that's my chance, And I went back home and I told my mom, I'm packing up to go to church because you say if I have the money, I can go. So I guess she was dumbfounded. She didn't really tell me, but that was just a way of God paving the way for me time and time again. And it's happened over many years, and I remembered all these years when I was becoming a Christian, God kept bringing to my mind this particular verse in Acts about how, believe in the Lord and you shall be saved, you and your whole household. And God was challenging me to trust him for my whole family to be saved. And I was praying that prayer every night for about a good 5 years or so. And I remember one Saturday, my youth pastor asked us who wants to trust God for reconciliation in the family among the members, you know, and I stood up because at that time my mother and my brother were fighting a lot. So I said I want to trust God for reconciliation between them. The next day I went to church. I felt like I should go home right away, which I did, and I found out that my brother and my mother had got into a verbal fight, and my brother had basically left the house. So I said a little prayer, didn't really think much of it, and went to take a nap. When I woke up, I found out that my brother came back, they fought again, and this time my mother ran out of the house. It was a bigger deal that your mom ran out of the house. So I went to my room and I was like, God, what's happening? And there was such a peace that came upon me, and I remembered the prayer that I trusted God for the day before. And so I just waited for my mom to come back. And when she came back, she told me that she had met this Bomo, which is really a Malay witch doctor, kind of like their priest. And he had met her and he had set her down and told her that if she wants to ensure peace in the family, she has to bathe at certain times of the day and do certain ritualistic practices. So I was furious to hear that. And I remember sitting her down and just basically telling her the story of Jesus, you know, and how Jesus was so real in my life and how I was willing to make all this sense because God is so real in my life. And she just listened. She was very stoic in her expression, but I remember her telling me, okay, you know, maybe Daddy and I will follow you to church next Sunday. So next Sunday came and they followed me to church, and I remembered my parents sitting beside me and I was just beside myself. I just couldn't believe that they came to church, you know. When it was time for them to give the call to accept Christ, they didn't go up, and I was disappointed, but I remembered that salvation is of the Lord. It's not from me. So it was very hard for me to let go and let God work work it in his timing. So after church, they came to me and they said, well, we're going to follow your uncle to church next Sunday because your cousin is getting baptized. So they followed him, and they came back that night and they sat me down. I remember my parents and my mom said, I want to tell you that your dad and I have become Christians, and the pastor is coming in 10 minutes' time to remove your grandfather and our family gods. Basically, remove our family ancestral's tablet. And that was a big step in them denouncing their faith, their old faith, and following Christ. So I just couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe that it had finally happened. So my mom asked me that night, she says, are you happy? I said, I'm overjoyed, of course, but I knew it was going to happen because I knew God was going to fulfill that promise for me that believe in me, you shall be saved, and you and your whole household. So I knew it was just a matter of time, but 5 years, you know. Anyway, so they became Christians, and since then, after they became Christians, my parents never not go to church. They always go to church. They never held any joss sticks. They never burned any paper money. They stopped going to the temple. They stopped eating food to idols because they've seen me done it. You know, and I felt like God was telling me, you made a stand. I'm going to make this your family legacy. You know, that they're not going to do all these things. So the biggest reward for me was when my grandmother, who was a 60-year-old staunch Taoist lady, who was enraged when my parents threw away her husband, came to me one afternoon and said, I want to know your Jesus. Can you tell me more about your Jesus? I remember calling my mother over the phone and just bawling my eyes out because my grandmother wants to know Jesus and wants to come to heaven with us. So my friend came and preached the gospel to her, and she accepted Christ that night. And likewise, she started giving to church. She never went to a temple again, and she never burned joss sticks or burned paper money again. And I know I'll see her in heaven one day. So I just want to be, I really think God is just so faithful, and so you can hold him to his words because he'll never fail us. As long as we're willing to obey him and make a stand for him, he will make sure his promises come true in our life. So that's my story.